One series that's followed me throughout my life and given me so many memories has been Resident Evil. I've been so incredibly fascinated by it from the first time I'd watch my mom beat the first one to watching my dad beat the second one. I've always been transfixed with the type of scared that it made me feel. Even if I couldn't make it past the first screen in the second game as a child. It followed me through my tween years while I awkwardly laughed in fear throughout Resident Evil Outbreak because of the NPCs spamming the in-game dialogue.
Excuse me. Hey! What?
The lore and story are what kept me hooked, and so it made sense that in a post-holiday haze in early 2005, when I see Resident Evil 4 finally on shelves, I used my gift money I had been saving to buy it immediately. This would be one of those taste-shaping events. Viewers of the channel know this though. I love this game. One of the greatest. I see it as the Skyrim of its era for being put on pretty much everything ever since its release, for better or worse. I've also given this remake some time in the sun on the channel by talking about how uninterested I was in the remake. Even if Capcom's had this impeccable track record both with the Resi series and with their output as a whole, I bought this game with the most hopeful skepticism. Yet here we are. It's been out for 7 months now, and I think Capcom rewrote their own textbook with this game. It's so good that it takes components of the original that are fine on their own, but creates something even better out of them, all while throwing the same curveballs they've been pitching with these remakes. But unlike the ones in the Resi 3 remake, this game trims and melts together in a way that highlights some of the aspects of the original that admittedly stick out as obtuse or maybe a little bit strange. I like how faithful it begins while showing how gorgeous it really is going to be, the world that sinks the player into the horror just as effectively as the originals, while showing the way the game takes the funneling it's adorned in the newest series without sacrificing the ambience that fans love from this European village. It's that same spin on the familiar I praised in the 2 and 1 remakes. My goal by the end of this vid is to illustrate why I think my biggest argument against this remake was how foundational the original was to shaping an era whose influence is arguably still felt in some spirits today. Hell, last week I talked about one of the best spiritual sequels this blueprint spawned, which just happened to also have a remake this year. While I was originally going to make that a bigger focus of this video in itself, comparing both originals and remakes, the Resi 4 remake really is just that level of different, and in some regards, does miles more to improve upon its foundation, which in concept alone is incredible. With that in mind, let's talk about the combat and gameplay simplicity within the original Resi 4 is its biggest strength. You got knife, and you got gun. Sometimes grenades too. They both have an attack, and you move a little rigidly but agile enough to skirt through the crowds. The attaché system is still insanely good, and the treasure hunting aspect in this game opens an avenue within the series that helps keep that increase in action within the world of Resident Evil blended with the world exploration a player did in the older Resident Evil games. The writing leans into a different lane of cheesiness to help schmaltz up the action aspect too, that sure turns some people off, but I personally enjoy as someone who enjoys the campiness of the original games. To those that caught any of my playthrough of the original Resi 4 a few years back for the Spooky Fest, you know how much I love how this game feels, and how much I enjoy the world it puts you in. With every twist the remake threw me, I found myself comparing it to the original, and by the end, I found myself enjoying what the remake did better pretty much every time. I'm not just talking about sequences either, but there are some choice ones that brought some great questions to the table when reevaluating the original. Why not have an extended boating sequence where you solve a puzzle while traversing the areas adjacent to the lake? You have this whole ass boss fight dedicated to the boat and its mechanics, yet after the fight there's barely any use for the boat? What a shame. Spicing up the winding around the castle with a Gigante fight that uses the cannon idea that basically doesn't get any use in the original? Genius. Implementing the new parry mechanic? Oh yeah, let's talk about The remake mechanically adds things that Village brought to the table and blends them within the recipe of Resi 4 masterfully. The resource management was an aspect I didn't expect to love from 8, but made an assload of sense, especially when taking things like inventory space as an attribute to your still at its core horror game. The one mechanic that gives that action-driven component its best enhancement, though, comes in the form of its parry. I love a good parry, and the game's few windows they give you for parries almost feel like a revamp on the QTE aspect of the original, something that I'm glad to see remain in the past for the record. The way they integrated parrying into one of the most iconic sequences in the game that was a notorious QTE cutscene in the original is incredible. Hey, speaking of the QTE... why have a dragon room with actual lava in your castle? Who asked for a damn sequence anyway, even if this sequence transcends me to being a teenager listening to Through the Never by Metallica while playing this segment? Why not give Louise more screen time, especially if you cut the line about Ashley's boobs and give him a more direct tie to the world with his past? The fact that he joins you during the minecart and mineshaft sequence turns this into a DKC worship in the best way possible. Plus, he turns the 1v2 El Gigante fight into a 2v2 team matchup. And the creme de la creme piece de resistance on top of that is that his death leads into the first Krauser fight, which is incredible. Now let's be real here, that container sequence is honestly kind of weird. I'll get to the DLC in a bit because something great does come from that sequence in the remake, but I digress. Tangentially, why the hell would Sadler actually be walking around if he's the leader of a group with a legion of seconds in command below him? The lack of his presence in this game makes him a bit scarier, honestly, when he does pop up. The already perfect merchant, too, is even better in this, somehow. The side quests and how they, in tandem with the treasures like the spinel, have their own setup in the shop, their own page, was a nice deepening of the shop mechanics I wasn't expecting. The challenges in his gallery kept me coming back for hours, every single time. The way the trinkets from that lean into the customization you could do with your attaché case adds depth and strategy that can shift throughout the game. The smaller shifts in the way the story is presented also just fill out the game so much better, like how you and Ashley get separated early on. The reshaping of the castle as a whole suits the spirit of this remake and excels in showing how strange the original was in hindsight, along with visually being the biggest overhaul that is just gorgeous. I don't mind the running from the statue of Salazar being taken out in lieu of just a better puzzle-driven set piece. Even if it's a good sequence in the original, the Ashley sequence with the blue light torch adds a good consistent defense, and the way Leon and Ashley get separated before it is another fun twist. Fuck it, while I'm at it, the Salazar fight is even better in the remake. His agile vibe is better than him just being a plant in the wall. Plus, again, what they do with his left hand is pretty damn cool. But again, we'll get to that. While the escort mechanics aren't quite the same, once I got them down, it honestly felt easier. I also adore Ashley in this game more as a whole. Her character, I just feel like, is written better. It's a better sidekick to Leon in this game. Admittedly, the island sequence doesn't feel all that different, but the Krauser fight is cool. The Ashley drives a vehicle section is a bit more interesting by keeping her in one spot more in the middle of a battlefield, and they didn't fuck up her generators, which is nice. If anything, they made them scarier. Why do they move like this? However, this can be the point where Look, they didn't keep all the cheesy lines from the original, but some of the new ones are good, and they kept bingo.
Where's everyone going?
Bingo.
The inclusion of some as trophy titles was great fun too. While the opening teases the twists on the familiar they were gonna throw at you by kiting the player through the first house set piece and showing off a new enemy variant, this game's Crimson Head if you will, the village encounter literally felt the same, and I flipped on that mercenaries mode mentality to ride that bike. Something that felt like was happening a lot in my action set piece sequences, even if the approach was slightly different, a la the opening of the castle. Even if the game pushes the stealth option, once the fighting starts, the combat blends with what the 3 remake was doing, with the new ideas and old into this delicious cocktail that I'd imagine what it feels like riding a motorcycle is like if we're rolling with the bike analogy. The fish still eats you. The fight with Cortez is still visually striking in a pretty direct way. The right-hand sequence is still deliciously tense, even without much changed. The closing stretch is still iconic. Capcom knew, guys, which I shouldn't have doubted. I know, the guys that reinvented Resi 1 and 2 knew what made Resi 4 work. That even extends into what they did with. Recently, they dropped the Separate Ways DLC. When I first saw it was $10, I was kinda shocked. Even if I just played it for the first time 2 years ago. It didn't leave the kind of impression that it was anything more than a nice free post-game unlockable that fills out the story more with some interesting moments that I never really thought how they came to be that way before I got there as Leon. Capcom decided to elevate that with the remake though, by not only doing that, while also giving Ada more stakes in the plot, but throwing back in some of those ideas lost from the original, and essentially making the Resi 3 remake again. You've got a deeper link between Ada and Salazar's left hand. You meet him in the beginning when you free Luis from captivity. He attacks you while you send Luis to safety and infects you via a sort of needle attack. He then crops back up in a few times throughout the story, acting as a mini-boss. This culminates into him essentially becoming it, the weird experiment you originally fight in the container sequence, but I've got to say, I enjoy this two-part final fight with him a bit more. On top of bringing that back, they also bring back the laser room with a visual twist that makes it look like a certain other Resident Evil iconic laser room. It also acts as the climax to a different one-off boss they made just for Ada's story. Along with giving Luis more screen time, they shift the dynamic between him and Ada in this that I'm also very into. It makes more sense for her character to have a dynamic with him and not Krauser as well. One moment I also like is when you watch Luis make one of his calls to Leon. It's such a weirdly awkward moment that opens one of the chapters that got a good laugh out of me.
Where do we go? Let's see.
As a whole, by the end, I got why Capcom charged for this. While filling in the blanks of the story in a similar way to the original, it's also just got more going on throughout it, while also giving more fan service with Wesker getting more screen time. It's got a taste of the side stuff also added in the main game, like the various side quests from the Merchant. Plus, they both got added into. Yeah, I know Mercenaries dropped before Separate Ways did, but that didn't really fit the flow of my script. This mode is so fucking fun though. While I thought it was alright in Village, that version felt a bit more soulless or kind of lacking in a reason to come back. It does make sense why it was free on the release though, given it's only got 3 levels and 4 people to unlock. 3 extra people to unlock, I guess. Even if it's got some suspicious microtransactions woven inside its nooks and crannies, it's inconsequential. It's so satisfying to tear ass through these hordes of enemies, and it shows that Capcom just gets this gameplay loop with this design archetype. It feels like a harmony of what was alright with Village's Mercenaries with the game feel of the Mercenaries modes from 5 and 6 especially. It shows just how refined the combat you use to conquer the game really is, and I can't not play it for at least 45 minutes whenever I decide to play. It adds one last twist on a remake that twists perfection into its own modern equivalent that rewrites the textbook and acts as a second celebration for one of my favorite games of all time. And that's gonna wrap up this review of a game from this year that I really fucking enjoyed. I think that it is baffling a little bit still to me just how good this remake is, but again, I just shouldn't have counted Capcom out. Either way, have you played the remake? Do you like it? Do you not? Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments down below. Are you excited for the future of Resident Evil? Sound off with that as well. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I don't know how many more of these type of game reviews I'd ever do, but this was a fun one to pull together. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on, and we are deep in the Halloween celebrations right now. I've got a fun discography review recontextualized dropping tomorrow with some fun Castlevania gameplay footage. It's going to act as my Castlevania content for the year. Hopefully you're excited for that. Either way, I'm going to go. I've been Viral Rack. Thank you again so very much for watching. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.